Hey, let's talk about something real for a minute. There's power in your focus, power in your silence. And when you start putting your energy back into yourself, that's when things start shifting. Not because you're being passive, but because you're being intentional. You don't owe your voice to everything. You don't need to explain every move you make. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is redirect. Redirect your time, your peace, and your purpose. So let's break it down. What happens when you stop pouring into what drains you and you start pouring into you? Let's pause here for a second and talk about what happens when you stop engaging in everything around you. When you make that quiet decision to pull back, not because you're afraid, not because you're weak, but because you're choosing clarity over chaos. See, clarity doesn't show up in a crowd. It's not loud. It doesn't beg for your attention. Clarity lives in silence. It lives in stillness. And for a lot of women, especially those who've spent years giving and fixing and managing, it's easy to confuse being busy with being purposeful. But those are not the same thing. When you're constantly reacting to the world around you, who said what, who misunderstood you, who disrespected you, you're operating in survival mode. You're burning energy trying to prove, explain, defend, and in that space, you lose sight of yourself, not because you're not strong, but because strength without direction leads to exhaustion. Now, the moment you decide to focus on yourself and stay quiet, that's when things start shifting, because silence gives you a new vantage point. You begin to see who's been draining you. You see what conversations were never meant to go anywhere. You realize how much of your time was being eaten up by distractions dressed as responsibilities. You stop reacting and you start observing, and that's where clarity begins. Let me say this clearly. Silence is not the absence of action. It's the presence of intention. When you're quiet, you can hear your own voice again. Not the voice shaped by what others need from you. Not the voice filtered through what culture tells you you're supposed to be. Your real voice. The one that says, I'm tired of proving. The one that whispers, I deserve more. The one that starts asking the questions you've been avoiding because you've been too busy surviving. That's the kind of clarity that doesn't just change your day, it changes your life. But here's the thing, clarity is uncomfortable at first, because when you finally see things clearly, you can't unsee them. You start realizing some people are only in your life because you never had time to pause and notice their absence would be a blessing. You notice how much of your identity was wrapped up in being needed instead of being known, and that can hurt, but it's also the beginning of your healing. You don't need to announce your silence. You don't need to justify it. You just step back. And in that space, you start to feel again. You feel the weight of the things you've carried. You feel the ache of your own unmet needs. You feel the pull toward peace. And the more you lean into that silence, the more those blurry lines start coming into focus. That's when decisions get easier. That's when boundaries make sense. That's when you stop asking for direction from people who've never walked your path. You finally realize, I don't need to fight for clarity. It's already within me. I just had to quiet the noise long enough to find it. Let's be real. Clarity is what helps you choose yourself without guilt. It's what allows you to walk away from conversations that serve no purpose. It's what helps you stop explaining your worth to people who were never meant to understand it. And the more you practice this, the less chaos you tolerate. Because once you've tasted peace, confusion starts to feel like poison. And I want to be clear about something. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish. It's wise. It's grounded. It's necessary. Because when you're clear on who you are and what you want, you stop wasting energy on things that aren't aligned. You become more intentional with your time, your love, your effort. And the result? You move differently. You speak with precision. You show up fully, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of overflow. Clarity doesn't make life perfect. It just makes it yours. It puts the power back where it belongs, in your hands. And when a woman chooses clarity over chaos, silence over noise, self over approval, everything around her shifts. Not because the world changed, but because she did. So if you're in that space right now, pulled in a dozen directions, unsure of what's next, this is your sign. Pull back, get quiet, turn the volume down on everything else, and start tuning into you. Because when you stop engaging with the noise, the answers have a way of rising up from within. And that's when you'll know you've found your clarity. Let's talk about energy for a second. Not just physical energy, but emotional, mental, spiritual. The kind that gets drained, not by what you're doing, but by who you're doing it for. The kind of energy that's pulled away every time you try to be everything to everyone, every time you feel the need to show up, speak up, defend, explain, or fix something that was never your responsibility in the first place. Because here's the truth, not everyone is entitled to your energy. And when a woman decides to stop handing it out like spare change, everything starts to shift. Focusing on yourself and staying silent isn't about shutting down. It's about shutting out what doesn't serve you. It's about knowing that your peace has value and that not every comment deserves a response. Not every opinion needs to be acknowledged. Not every situation requires your presence. That's not being cold. That's being wise. Your energy is a limited resource. You've only got so much to give every day. And if you're constantly pouring it into people who don't pour it back, into conversations that leave you drained, into spaces that never see your worth, then what's left for you, what's left for your growth, your joy, your purpose? Silence is a filter. It keeps out what doesn't belong. It allows you to stand in a room and know exactly what's worth your time and what's just noise. It creates a boundary that says, I don't owe you my reaction. I don't owe you access to me, because access to you, real access, is a privilege, not a guarantee. When you protect your energy, you stop engaging with everything that moves. You start choosing your peace over your pride. That means letting go of the need to correct every lie, to defend every choice, to prove every point. Some people aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for chaos. And when you stop giving them that reaction, you take away their power. People will notice when you pull your energy back. Don't be surprised if they call you distant or cold or selfish. That's okay. Let them talk, because what they're really saying is, I don't know how to access you anymore. Good. That's the point. You're not here to be drained. You're not here to be depleted. You're not here to constantly explain your worth to people who've already made up their minds. There is strength in restraint, power in stillness, and when you choose not to engage, you're not being passive. You're being precise. You're teaching the world how to treat you by what you no longer respond to. This is about self-respect. It's about recognizing that your energy has to go where it grows something. If it's not growing your peace, your purpose, your joy, your faith, your future, then it doesn't need your fuel. And I want you to hear this clearly. You do not owe everyone a seat at your table just because they've known you, helped you, or even loved you at one point. Loyalty doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It means knowing when to walk away without hate, without drama, without noise, just a quiet decision that your energy is better protected elsewhere. There's a reason the most powerful people in the room are often the quietest. They've learned to guard their energy like a currency. They've learned that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means discipline. It means knowing you could speak, could react, could correct, but choosing not to, because your energy is better spent building, not battling. So if you're tired, if you're stretched thin, if you feel like you're constantly pouring from an empty cup, this is your reminder. Step back, get quiet, guard your energy. Start asking, does this deserve a reaction? Is this worth the cost of my peace? Am I giving out of guilt or out of alignment? You'll start to notice things. You'll see who respects your boundaries and who only liked you when you were overextending. You'll see who adds to your life and who just takes. You'll start to feel the difference between what energizes you and what drains you. And the more you honor that, the more power you reclaim. It's not your job to be available for everything. It's your job to be available for what aligns with your purpose, your peace, and your future. And when that becomes your filter, you don't have to explain why you're quiet. You don't have to justify the distance. People will either understand your silence or reveal why they never deserved your energy in the first place. So protect it like it's sacred, because it is. And once you do, you'll stop running on empty. You'll start feeling whole again. You'll see how much lighter life feels when you're no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. And that's when everything starts to fall into place. Let's slow down and get honest for a minute. You ever feel like you're constantly being pulled? Like life is happening to you in every direction at once? People needing answers, situations, demanding reactions, voices in your head saying you have to fix it, fix them, fix everything. It's exhausting. But when one makes the conscious choice to pull back, to stay silent and focus inward, that's when something powerful happens. She stops reacting and starts responding. And eventually she stops responding at all to things that aren't aligned. That's not indifference. That's discipline. That's growth. That's how you become unshakable. Being unshakable doesn't mean nothing ever affects you. It means your peace is no longer up for negotiation. It means you've learned to sit in silence, breathe through discomfort, and not be moved by everything that moves around you. You ever notice how people will try to pull you into their chaos just because they're uncomfortable with your calm? That's real. And when you start living with more intention, when you stop playing emotional ping pong with people who live for drama, you're going to confuse some folks. Let them be confused. Your job is not to explain your growth to people who are committed to staying the same. When you stop being reactive, you stop being manipulated, you stop being predictable, you stop being easy to provoke, that's when the power starts shifting, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady one. You start showing up with presence, not pressure, and that presence, calm, grounded, rooted, that's what makes people pay attention. Now listen, this doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you won't speak when something matters. What it means is you've trained yourself to respond with purpose, not panic. You've built something within you that doesn't rattle every time someone throws a little chaos your way. That's what unshakable looks like. It looks like not taking the bait when someone tries to poke at your peace. It looks like smiling and walking away from conversations that used to trigger you. It looks like knowing when to speak and when to let your silence speak louder. It looks like not rushing to prove yourself every time someone questions your path. When you get to that point, you realize being unshakable isn't about how loud you can be. It's about how little noise you need to make. Let me say that again. Being unshakable isn't about volume. It's about stability, stillness. And that kind of strength, it's built in the quiet. It's built in the moments when no one sees you doing the inner work. It's built every time you resist the urge to explain yourself to people who only want access to your reaction, not your reality. You don't have to convince people you've changed. You just live it. You let your consistency speak. You let your choices do the talking. And over time, people either level up or fall off. Either way, your peace stays intact. Because when you become unshakable, your self-worth stops being tied to external validation. You're no longer waiting for someone else to approve of you before you feel confident. You know who you are, you know what you bring, you know where you're headed. That doesn't mean you have it all figured out. It means your foundation is solid. It means you trust yourself. And when you trust yourself, you stop spiraling when things go wrong. You stop chasing closure. You stop begging for clarity from people who benefit from keeping you confused. You just stand. And that stillness, that grounded posture, that's what creates real authority. Not because you're loud, not because you have to dominate the room, but because your energy says, I don't need to be understood to be at peace. I know who I am. Let me be real with you. It takes time to get here. It takes practice. You don't just wake up unbothered one day. You build that. You earn that. Every time you choose peace over pettiness. Every time you hold your boundary instead of explaining it. Every time you walk away without needing to prove a point. And yes, it's going to feel lonely at first. Silence can be uncomfortable, especially if you're used to performing for people's approval, but stay with it. Because what you build in the quiet, that becomes your anchor. That becomes your confidence. That becomes the reason nothing around you can shake what's inside you. So if people say you've changed, say thank you. If they say you're cold, let them. If they say you don't care anymore, smile and keep walking. Because your peace is not up for debate. Your energy is no longer available for everything, and your growth doesn't require applause. It just requires you to keep standing, even when it's quiet, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one else understands, because that's what unshakable looks like. And once you've built that within yourself, nothing and no one can take it from you. Let's get into something that people don't talk about enough: alignment. Because when you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop showing up in places that constantly overlook you, that's when the right things start showing up for you. See, there's this quiet shift that happens when a woman starts focusing on herself and gets still. She's no longer broadcasting her worth to prove anything. She's no longer trying to convince people to choose her, see her, validate her. Instead, she's just being present, intentional, clear. And that shift, that's when she starts attracting what she actually deserves. Because here's the thing, when you are constantly in chase mode, constantly trying to fix, prove, or perform, you're not attracting, you're scrambling. And people can feel that energy. You draw in what you tolerate, not what you desire. But when you get grounded in who you are, when your silence becomes strength and not punishment, when you move in peace, not panic, that's when alignment begins. And you don't have to force it. People start treating you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. You've raised the frequency. You're no longer available for inconsistency. You don't chase closure. You don't argue to be heard. You're not begging for reciprocity. You've stopped showing up in rooms that don't value what you carry. And in doing that, you clear space. And in that space, the right people, the right opportunities, the right energy begins to find you. Not because you're lucky, but because you've done the inner work to finally receive it. See, when your focus is inward, your standards go up. You become more selective, not in a judgmental way, but in a discerning way. You don't entertain what doesn't align anymore. You stop settling for half-hearted attention, for one-sided effort, for relationships that make you feel more anxious than seen. And here's what's beautiful about that. You no longer have to ask for what you need 20 times, because what you attract now already respects your presence. You no longer have to lower your voice to be liked. You no longer have to overextend to keep anyone. That's what happens when your energy changes. The wrong ones get uncomfortable. The right ones get curious. And the real ones lean in. You're not asking anymore. You're attracting. And let me say this plainly. Attraction doesn't come from loud moves. It comes from quiet confidence. The kind that says, I don't need you to pick me. I've already picked me. You walk into spaces differently. You speak with less urgency and more clarity. You're not rushing to prove your worth because you know it's not up for debate. And people can feel that. Whether they admit it or not, they adjust or they exit. Either way, your peace is protected. Now, let's be real. It won't happen overnight. The first part of this journey is lonely. You're going to feel the absence of old patterns. People might fall away. Opportunities might dry up for a moment. But don't panic. That's the pruning before the growth. The universe, God, whatever you believe in, it doesn't reward confusion. It rewards clarity. And when you finally start showing up with boundaries, with self-respect, with quiet conviction, you become a magnet for everything you were chasing before. Not because you yelled louder, but because you stopped running. That's when the job aligns, the friendship aligns, the relationship aligns, the peace aligns. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you embody. So if you want love that's stable, be stable within yourself. If you want peace, let go of chaos, even if it's familiar. If you want people to respect you, start respecting your own boundaries. You don't need to control how it comes. You just need to control how you carry yourself until it does. This isn't about being hard. This isn't about shutting everyone out. It's about protecting the space where the right can come in. It's about being so deeply rooted in your own value that you stop accepting half of anything, half effort, half truth, half love, and you don't need to say much. Your energy will say it for you. The more you stay focused on your growth, the more the world around you adjusts. What's not meant for you begins to fall away, not as punishment, but as protection. And what's aligned starts showing up without all the noise. You just have to be still enough to let it find you. So no, you're not too quiet. No, you're not too distant. You're focused, and that focus is working in your favor. Keep doing the inner work. Keep honoring your silence. Keep walking in alignment. You don't have to chase what's already yours. You just have to become the version of you that's ready to receive it. Because when you do, it finds you. And it fits without the begging, without the confusion, without the compromise. That's the power of protecting your peace. And that's when what you deserve finally starts showing up. Let me be real with you. There comes a point in your growth where you realize that not everything needs to be said. Not every emotion needs a stage. Not every thought deserves to be voiced. Why? Because you've learned to communicate something more powerful than words, action. That's the mark of maturity. That's the mark of strength. That's what happens when a woman stops trying to emotionally manage everything and starts leading herself with intention. See, emotion isn't bad. We're human. You're going to feel. You should feel. But there's a big difference between honoring your emotions, and being led by them. When you're led by emotion, you're reactive. When you're grounded in action, you're effective. And that shift where you stop explaining and start demonstrating, that's when your communication evolves. That's when people start taking you seriously. That's when your boundaries become clear, even when you say nothing. Because here's the truth, people listen less to what you say and more to what you do. You can say, I'm done 20 times, but if you keep showing up, they'll keep ignoring you. You can say, I need space, but if you never take it, they won't respect it. You can say, I want better, but if your actions accept less, that's the real message. Your behavior speaks louder than your voice ever could. And when you get silent, when you stop pleading, when you stop trying to argue your point into existence, that's when your actions start making statements. Not in a spiteful way, not to punish anyone, but because you've chosen peace over performance. That's power. That's when someone starts realizing, oh, she's not asking anymore. She's moving different. And yes, that movement might confuse some people, especially if they're used to the emotional version of you, the one who cried, begged, argued, texted back, the one who gave warnings instead of walking away, the one who used her voice to try to fix what only silence and boundaries could fix. But when you mature past that, you stop over-explaining, you stop chasing understanding, you stop trying to make people see your side. Because now you are your side, you're not trying to convince. You're walking it out. You're showing up differently, and they can either rise to meet that version of you or fall off. Either way, you're at peace. You start setting boundaries without saying, this is my boundary. You start showing what you allow, what you protect, what you won't accept without ever needing a dramatic moment. That's emotional intelligence. You might still feel things deeply, but you're no longer broadcasting every emotion. You've learned that some things don't need an announcement. They need a decision. They need a shift in energy. A change in rhythm. You get quiet. You get intentional. You let your exit be the answer. You let your lack of response be the reply. And in that quiet shift, you gain clarity. You stop asking, do they understand me? And start asking, do I feel aligned with what I'm doing? Because the truth is, people hear your silence clearer when they're used to your noise. And when you stop reacting emotionally, you take away their ability to control the narrative. You're no longer playing a part in the drama. You're writing your own story on your terms. That doesn't mean you're hard. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you've learned to channel emotion instead of live. You've learned that real communication happens in the decisions you make consistently, not in the speeches you give temporarily. In that kind of strength, it changes everything. Your relationships shift, your environment shifts, you start attracting people who feel your clarity, not just hear your words. Because here's what happens. When you communicate through action, your life becomes your message. People see your priorities, not just hear them. They feel your boundaries, not just read about them in a text. They respect your absence when they didn't respect your presence, because now your absence actually means something. That's not manipulation, that's alignment. It means you're no longer asking people to change. You're changing how you participate. You're no longer expecting someone else to give you closure. You're giving it to yourself. You're no longer reacting to disrespect. You're removing access. In that shift, that's emotional maturity in motion. You don't have to fight for space anymore. You create it. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You've raised your standards. You don't have to tell people what you deserve. You live like someone who knows it. That's what quiet action looks like. That's what unshakable communication sounds like. No yelling, no performing, no emotional labor to make others feel comfortable while you suffer in silence. Just presence, just decisions, just consistent action that reflects your truth. And the beauty of that, you never lose your peace trying to prove your point, because now you're not speaking to be understood, you're living to be aligned. And the world adjusts accordingly. Let's talk about power, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that doesn't need permission. The quiet kind. The kind that comes back to you the moment you stop handing it out. That's what happens when a woman focuses on herself and stays silent. She doesn't just find herself. She reclaims her power, piece by piece, thought by thought, choice by choice. Because here's what's real. When you're constantly explaining yourself, constantly reacting, constantly fighting to be seen, you start leaking power, and you don't even realize it's happening. It slips through every time you answer a question that doesn't deserve a response. Every time you overextend for someone who's underinvested. every time you shrink to be liked or stay to be understood. That's how it's lost. But here's the beautiful part. You can take it back. And you don't need revenge. You don't need a dramatic exit. You don't need to prove them wrong. You just need to choose yourself consistently, quietly, without apology. Because real power, it's not about control. It's about ownership. Ownership of your time, ownership of your peace, ownership of your energy, your boundaries, your worth. When you step into that space, you stop asking for permission to rest. You stop waiting for someone to validate your decision. You stop letting people rent space in your head when they've shown you they can't respect your heart. That's power. And it looks different for everyone. For some, it's saying no without explaining. For others, it's walking away from conversations that always circle back to chaos. For you, maybe it's finally admitting you're not responsible for other people's emotions. Whatever it looks like, reclaiming your power starts when you stop performing. You stop being who they expect. You stop smiling through the discomfort. You stop watering yourself down just to keep the peace. And that silence, that shift, that grounded calm, that's you finally saying, enough. I've got me now. It's not angry. It's not bitter. It's not cold. It's clear. Because you know what happens when you reclaim your power. You stop carrying what isn't yours. You stop bending over backward for people who don't bend at all. You stop dimming your light because someone else can't handle the brightness. You start choosing alignment over approval, wholeness over hype, healing over history. And yes, it's going to feel different at first because your power won't always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like stillness, like finally breathing, like waking up and not dreading your day. Like being able to sit with yourself in peace without needing to distract, defend, or escape. That's the shift. You stop running from your reflection and start owning your decisions. Not because you've arrived, but because you've decided to stop abandoning yourself. That's what power is. It's self-respect turned into routine. It's boundaries that don't wobble. It's standards that don't shrink. It's a life that feels good to you, even if it makes others uncomfortable. And when you carry that kind of energy, the game changes. You're no longer emotionally available for chaos. You're no longer showing up to arguments you didn't start. You're no longer watering dead plants just because you're used to the garden. You're moving different, speaking different, choosing different, not to prove anything, but because you finally believe you deserve better, and more importantly, you're acting like it. People might say you're acting brand new. Let them. People might say you're cold, that you've changed, that you don't care anymore. Truth is, you do care. You just don't carry. You don't carry the guilt. You don't carry the blame. You don't carry other people's inability to meet you where you've grown. And that's what makes you powerful. Because you've realized something most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Your peace is your responsibility. Your healing is your job. And your power, it was never in their hands. It was always in yours. You just had to stop giving it away. So now you don't chase, you don't beg, you don't argue, you don't explain. You just walk in it quietly, boldly, softly. And the world notices because nothing is louder than a woman who's no longer available for what drains her. Nothing is more magnetic than someone who stands in their truth without shouting it. Nothing is more powerful than a woman who owns her story and doesn't need anyone else to rewrite it for her. You've been strong before. This time, be powerful. Not because you had to survive something, but because you finally decided to choose yourself on purpose. You reclaim your power every time you do that. Every time you say less and move smarter. Every time you sit in silence and choose peace. Every time you put your energy back in your own hands. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And it's yours now. Don't hand it back.